Hey everybody, welcome back. In our storytelling series, today I have with me McKain Lakey. I'm just going to introduce McKain in her own words from her website. McKain Lakey is a songwriter, performer, teacher, luthier, and sound engineer. McKain knows every inch of the musician life. With voice, banjo, fiddle, and her handcrafted guitar, Lakey draws her creative inspiration from the American folk tradition, touring nationally, and her patented mix of old-time tunes and new roots originals exist wherever the imagination of John Hartford flows into the grit of Hazel Dickens. In the beating heart of Americana, forever old and new, described by What's Up magazine as a time capsule unearthed, fine-tuned, and reimagined. Following the success of her debut EP, West, Lakey is currently working on a full-length studio album expected in May of 2021. McKain is also a graduate of the Berklee College of Music. Welcome, McKain.
Thanks for having me.
My audience is not specifically a music audience, and so they are also not necessarily familiar with American folk or Americana. But I wonder if you can give us a little rundown of Americana and those two references to those people that were in your bio.
Americana, I think, is sort of developed as a bit of an umbrella term for a lot of different kinds of American folk music, of which there is a lot. So there's some debate over, what to call a lot of folk music without getting too technical. So I think Americana just becomes this umbrella term, which, some people like, some people don't like, but that's a debate for another time. A lot of the music that I do comes from the American old time tradition, which exists all over the US in different forms, but big sort of like reference point for that music is comes from the Appalachian Mountains and that region of the US. The basic rundown history of old time music, which I tell my students about a lot, is old time sort of comes from the interplay between music from mostly Scotch-Irish immigrants that were living in like North Carolina, East Tennessee, or what is now that area, and African folks who were largely enslaved at the time. And so there's a lot of interplay within that music between traditions from the British Isles and African traditions. So for instance, the banjo, which is an instrument that I play, was originally an African instrument. And the style that I play, which is called clawhammer, which is where you hit the strings with the back of your fingernail and then pull up on your thumb, that the history of that technique definitely has a direct link to African instruments. It's this kind of cross-cultural collaboration that kind of would only exist within the history of the US, which of course is very layered and complicated, and I think that layer, all those layers are reflected in this music in various ways. And so that was sort of the origin of a lot of this music, but of course it's spread to different parts of the country, had all kinds of other influences. There's a lot of intermixing of cultures within old time music, which I think is something that is worth pointing out, because I think that sort of at the advent of recording technology, when all of this music started to be commercialized and marketed, it became very segregated, right? So there was hillbilly records and there were race records. Not my terms. That's just how they were marketed in early recording. And so they took this music that really was rooted in a lot of different traditions, and they separated it into basically white and black. Over time, what old time was became sort of mixed into this label of being hillbilly music, became very whitewashed, became very associated with white culture and racism. I'm not trying to say that old time music, it's all good, it comes from this utopia where we were all getting along and playing music together, but I do think it's important to recognize that there's a lot of contributions to old time that are not specifically rooted in white American lineage. And I think old time sort of was the foundation for a lot of American styles. So, country music, bluegrass music, even like ragtime and early jazz, there's crossover with old time. So a lot of music has kind of come from that. Hazel Dickens is a singer and songwriter from West Virginia, or was a singer songwriter from West Virginia. Really powerful woman, sung a lot about the struggles of coal miners in West Virginia, among other things. She was in a duo called Hazel and Alice, which was a duo between her and Alice Gerard. Alice Gerard is very much still alive and kicking, living in North Carolina and doing amazing work. I got to be a part of a workshop that she was teaching at, which is awesome. And then John Hartford is another sort of trailblazer in a very different direction. He's someone who is very, very playful in his writing. So I highly recommend listening to both of these people, but if you listen to John Hartford, he's someone that was very much rooted in, traditional old time and bluegrass, like had, a lot of these styles down, was someone who went and like tracked down old timers to learn directly from the source, was, going deep into hollers to find that one guy who played the one fiddle tune on this one field recording from one blah 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 year. Like John Hartford was doing that kind of work. And so he was very steeped, but he also was super creative and quirky with a lot of his songwriting. So like he has a song that's just about the sound of a washing machine. He has he has just a lot of like quirky songs, which I feel like is a really beautiful thing and something that I try and strive for in my music, of sort of cultivating like curiosity and playfulness amidst, being rooted in a tradition. Yeah, his version of storytelling to me is really fascinating and interesting. And I think that he, in a lot of ways, also sort of opened some doors to like what bluegrass or old time music could look like. So there's my brief or not so brief overview.
Hazel Dickens, to put it in context, I think she was born in 1925.
There's definitely been women playing this music for a very long time, and I think a lot of, especially the ballad tradition, was very much passed down like woman to woman, which is, I think, a really beautiful tradition. As far as like women playing music, I think that there definitely was a lot of women playing music, and women instrumentalists, women playing for dances, all that kind of stuff. I do think that there was a tendency for women to play more when they were younger or when they were older. I heard a lot of stories of women who sort of like took a break when they started families, and then when their kids were grown or their husbands passed away or something like that, then they would pick it up again. There's as many different stories for women's relationship to music as there are, women playing music. So I think that there's a lot of variation there. But I think that, women have been a part of this tradition, even if they haven't been the most like forefront players in terms of like who was documented or that kind of thing.
What is the appeal for you of this genre of music and its real links to lineage and prioritization of lineage and tradition?
There's a lot of layers to that question. So there's a lot of this music that relates in some way to sort of the story of my family. There wasn't like music passed down. I've been sort of the person spearheading a lot of this myself. It's not like I'm a part of a direct lineage within my family of music being passed down. But my dad's side of the family, my great-grandparents were from North Carolina and moved across the country, wound up settling in Washington state. And so that's where, I was raised. And within old time and American music in general, there's a lot of this story of, European immigrants moving westward across the country. And that very much is echoed in, my family history. And so for me, there was definitely an interest in sort of tracking down just elements of my family history from the perspective of music, because that's kind of how I look at the world. I think there's also some really interesting ways of examining American history through the lens of looking at music that was coming out at different times, because I find that music tends to be sort of a mirror to society. Like a lot of the themes that come up in music are often reflections of themes that are coming up, in the public square. And especially within folk music, I find that it's really fascinating to kind of dig through all of these layers of American history by looking at who was singing, singing and playing music, and how all of those people influenced each other. And I find that it can also be a more I don't know, like a more rich way of looking through that history. I find history as taught in, American public school system. It's a history written by white men, basically. Whereas folk music has been, there's contributions from so many different people. So I feel like in some ways you can get a broader idea of American history by looking through at music than you can by looking at, sort of what's taught as dominant history. I find that it's really fascinating to go through and see just how relevant a lot of these songs are from the past to things that people are experiencing right now. So I think that all of those are definitely things that draw me to this music. It's also just, fun to play. So there's that.
In what ways do you think that this time and your unique social identity informs the way you embrace and challenge the stories and the genres of Americana music?
I feel like my contribution, in some ways pushes some boundaries within these genres. In both the EP that I released and this upcoming album, I think there's in both some exploration of fighting against misogyny, or just delving into the experiences of women in the workplace, or women in relationship to men, or all kinds of different things. And then also in my upcoming album, there's definitely some exploration of queerness as well, which is another identity of mine. And I think that having explicit dialogue about these things using today's language, it just feels like a continuation of patterns that have been spearheaded and developed by so many women across time. I've been taking a little class that's run by Joe Siemens, who's a part of a duo, Joe Siemens and Ben Hunter, and they play a lot of early blues and things like that. Really awesome music. And so Joe's been teaching this class that's about basically doing anti-racism work through the lens of music, which is something that has also been really important to me as well. And one of the things that we were looking at is the history of early women in blues. So looking at Ma Rainey and some of these early blues singers, and there's totally this exploration of women's empowerment and queerness, and fighting against the structures in the world, and fighting against racism, fighting against all these different things. So and that's the 20s. So I mean, for me, I'm just it's not new what I'm doing, but it's just kind of moving it into, I guess, the language of this era.
I first heard you play when you were immersed in the tradition of learning murder ballads and playing murder ballads. And I'm curious, what drew you to that particular subgenre of Americana?
Part of it is probably just a deep-seated obsession with true crime. But I think also there's definitely layers of just being trying to unpack it, a little bit. Okay, so here are these songs that are so rooted in these deeply problematic things. And, how is it that these songs came to be, and why did they keep getting perpetuated, and why do they keep being sung now like they're not a big deal? What is this? Can we take a look at this phenomenon for a second? Because I think that, murder ballads are something that are just so horrific. And yet there's so many situations that you come across where people are singing them, playing them, and not even really thinking about what they're singing or playing. It's just here's a song that I heard, it sounded cool, so I'm singing it. and not really thinking about the actual impact of that. And I think that there's a problem in our culture of normalizing, abuse against people, but in this context, abuse against women. Normalizing abusive behavior has a really negative effect, even if it's subconscious, even if it's not something that we're just, we're like, oh, I listened to this murder ballad and now I'm going to go kill a lady. Like, that's not what's going to happen. But it might mean that, people look the other way when they see, a woman who's might not be in a safe situation or something like that. I was definitely like drawn to these narratives and drawn to examining them from a critical perspective and saying like, okay, like how can we look at these in a way that is more truthful, like more delving into like what the actual perspective of the women in these scenarios was, as opposed to just this male narrative of like, here's me, I killed this lady. It's like, okay, well, that was a human who had their own life and their own stories. And so yeah, I think that for me, learning a lot of these murder ballads and researching the history behind them really came from this desire to like dig into what the broader context of this phenomenon was. There's a difference between, examining and addressing an issue and making light of it, or not telling the full story, or using it to perpetuate ways of like keeping women in line. Yeah, I think that there are ways to address it without playing into these kind of problematic narratives.
You wrote a murder ballad of your own in this storytelling tradition, Sadies Song. Can you tell us a little bit about how that fits in that tradition and how it speaks to all of these challenges?
Sadies Song I wrote as basically a direct response to the ballad Little Sadie. And basically the premise of the song is it's told from the perspective of this man. He gives no context about this woman that he kills, but it's basically like, I went out one night to make a little round, met Little Sadie, and I shot her down. And that's like all there is to say about her life. And then it's the story of him saying like, going to bed, went to sleep, woke up the next morning and was like, oh, whoops, realizes like, oh, I killed this lady, I should probably get the hell out of Dodge. So he packs up and runs from the police, and so the song is like him running from the police, getting caught by the police. And so I like took a look at this song and I was just like, this makes me so angry. Like, there is no mention of this woman at all, no accountability for like, her story or like the impact that he had on her life and the lives of the people around her. There's nothing like that. And so I basically took some of the details of this song and used them to rewrite like a fictionalized version of the song. And later on, I got more into actually researching the history of some of these songs that are directly tied to real life crimes that happened. So after writing this song, I started getting a little more historically accurate. But for this one, I basically just kind of wrote a fictionalized story that was trying to look at what the story of this song was from the perspective of Sadie and how she was feeling. And I think that there's a growing number of women within folk music that are doing that and have been writing response songs. I think that there's some songs that sort of take on the topic of murder ballads and they say, oh, well, we're just going to reverse roles, we're going to make the women kill the man. But I don't particularly love that approach. Women kill men for very different reasons than men kill women, it's not. And so like, you can say that it's like, this reclamation of power, and like, yes, maybe that's true. But I think that also both narratives are deeply rooted in misogyny and patriarchy, because most of the time when women kill men, it's because they're being abused by that man. They're not killing that man unnecessarily. Instead of just like taking the route that these men took of killing, I wanted to just retell the story in a way that felt like it was naming what was happening, and naming it for what it was. Which was, senseless murder of this woman, and not turn it into a revenge narrative. I wanted it to be like a call out, a saying like, you committed this crime, this is the impact that you had, and you have to sit with that, like the world has to sit with that. To me, that felt like um, a more authentic way to address the issue of like women being murdered. So Sadie's Song is a song that it's basically, yeah, just a retelling of that story from through the voice of Sadie, from the perspective of Sadie.
In what way do you think music is a particularly potent form of storytelling?
I think that music just adds this dimension of emotionality that obviously, writing in all different forms and storytelling in all different forms can really get at these really intense emotional, responses. I think that in some ways, music makes my job a little easier because it kind of set the emotion through the music to some extent, and then have that be just sort of mirrored with the lyrical content. There's a space for like interplay between the music and the lyrics when it comes to music that you might not get if you're just in the realm of words. But I think that music also, I think there's something really physical about music that is really beautiful. And I think that it's something that is really deeply human, unlike language, where you have to have a certain understanding of the language to understand the art piece, although not always. Nonsense language, I guess, is a thing. Arguments for all kinds of things. There's context for everything that's important, and it's possible to connect with any kind of music no matter what your background is. I think it's important to understand context because it can add so much weight and so much power to what is being communicated through music. But I think that there's this fundamental physicality that's really beautiful and awesome to watch as a songwriter who performs my music, like to be able to see just like the visceral effect of like what music can do on an individual level and also on a communal level when you get a bunch of people in a room and just see what it's like to have this wave of like emotion just come across a group of people, and to be able to like create that connection between people who are all experiencing, their own individual interpretations, but also this collective energy. And also the connection with like our bodies and dance and movement and rhythm. I think that there's something that's like really human and awesome about the physicality of music and how we can all kind of feel it within ourselves.
And so for me, your music is like the river that carries me along. And then your gorgeous voice is like this safe, secure boat that carries me and embraces me to take me to all the tender and vulnerable places I might not go alone. And then the lyrics are kind of like the map that leads us to the destination. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you work with all those different elements and how you create that world through those elements.
Man, that's such a beautifully framed question. Thank you for that description. That's really lovely. I had a friend once describe my songs as vignettes, which was a word that I liked a lot. Here's this snippet of a story, and here's this little, look into a story, and here's this little look into a story. I think for me, it's a balance of trying to, explore things that topics and stories that feel authentic to who I am and where I come from and what I have to contribute. Also thinking about what is going to serve, the people listening to it. I think there's like a shared goal there between those two things. What is something that feels deeply meaningful for me, balancing that with um, you know how can we use this to connect and build community, build safety, build that expression of vulnerability. And I think that part of my role is writing songs, but then part of my role is delivering songs and being able to create an environment where people can tap into these more core parts of who they are and find some like common humanity in a lot of it. And yeah, I feel like definitely a duty to be able to create those spaces to make people feel safe, to make people feel heard in their own expression. And those are like elements that definitely come into play in terms of like hurting the path of this journey, but also making it a space where like, yeah, someone can get into the boat with me and we can go down the river together. Those are the two things that kind of come to mind for me in terms of like creating that.
Your voice is so pure and clear. I mean, a strong voice, a clear voice, beautiful notes. But there is also the tenderness in your voice and the vulnerability, I think, in your voice. And how do you get there every night when you're performing? How do you manage to keep open to bringing yourself to that experience?
Part of it is sort of a rebellion. So I went to music school. I went to Berkeley in Boston, and voice was my primary instrument when I was in school. And I feel like there were a lot of elements of that experience that were very challenging and sometimes traumatic. And I came away feeling really frustrated with sort of a culture that I think exists in a lot of like conservatories or music schools, things like that, where there's an emphasis on technical perfection all the time. I felt like there was something like deeply human that just got lost when it became primarily about technical perfection. Upon leaving Berkeley, I sort of like, I think was trying to tap into like, how can I resist this like value system that values like perfection? Sitting in imperfection and sitting in vulnerability feels like a way of kind of rebelling against like this sort of broader pressure to be perfect or broader pressure to conform to like standards that are set by other people. Music is about expressing something deeper and more vulnerable and more powerful, and that's rooted in making mistakes, and that's rooted in roughness and being okay with that. And so I think that there was something that I really wanted to cultivate in the way that I approached singing. When I'm in a room with an audience, I can see people's faces. I can see people sharing that with me, sharing their vulnerability, like coming back to this feeling of duty where it's like, like if these people came here, invested their time and their energy into having this experience, and they're here showing up for me, giving me all of this, this love and this attention and this like power, passion, whatever they're bringing to the table, grief, fear, whatever, like if they're brave enough to like show up and share these things within this space with me, then it makes me really want to lean into that and provide that space.
So I would say that somewhere the new album, I had a little sneak peek, not peek, but sneak listen to somewhere, and it is such a fun album.
Basically, since 2018, I've been touring at least half the year, if not more, doing all solo shows. So it's been a lot of building these intimate moments with people, and that is so special, and I value it so much. And I think that the one thing I was missing in creating that environment was creating a space to dance. That's such an important element of music as well. And so in coming into making this album, I really wanted to create something that people could dance to, that I could, get a full band, go out to a bar, get the whole room two-stepping. Like I want fun, connecting with other people, like having a good time, moving your body, like, all those kinds of things. This was a really fun album to make, even though like obviously constraints of COVID. It was awesome to get so many different musicians to come in. Basically my parts along with the bass and drums we recorded live. Bass and drums in one room masked up, and I was in a separate room, but we played all those live to tape, which was awesome, kind of as like a ground foundational level, and then had a bunch of other musicians come in to layer tracks on top. So we've got fiddle, we've got electric guitar, we've got pedal steel, and then like a horn section for a number of the songs, which made me so happy. So yeah, it was like really fun to make, and I'm thinking I'm hoping that this music will be really fun to tour down the line when touring becomes a thing again. I was definitely feeling at the beginning of COVID like I can't write any more like sad songs. I feel like the best way that I can support people in the world is to give them something that is more uplifting, more, more fun, more playful. So it felt really cool to kind of expand on, my comfort zone and sort of step into more of a like full band sound. And it was really fun, yeah, to play with these different genre distinctions. What are the full band sounds that I really love, and how can I incorporate some of those in this music? The opening song on the record is basically a banjo tune with like a very like groovy, funky like rhythm section situation. We've got a fiddle and a saxophone like dueling it out. So there's a little bit of playfulness in that. And that one is named has John Hartford is the title of that song name. In some ways, sort of a reference to him messing with the genre lines and being playful in his writing. Definitely references some of like kind of Paul Simon Graceland vibes in the arrangement. Songs like "Crush on You" is another song that I feel like I was trying to go for like a little bit of a like kind of retro Cajun swamp pop kind of vibe to it. So it's got a horn section and also got a fiddle, and definitely a very like danceable kind of a song. And getting into that rockabilly territory for sure. Definitely like straight up stole an electric guitar part from a Wanda Jackson song and like unabashedly used it as the foundation for one of the songs on the album. So yeah, there's definitely some danceable stuff. I think that there's a balance too. There's a few songs on there that are kind of classic McKain touchy-feely banjo songs, but I was definitely having a lot of fun kind of getting a little bit more playful and trying to tap into, music that could really not just get people in their minds, but also get people in their bodies and moving. I hope that it's something that people will enjoy. I think it is. I think it'll be, a fun one.
It just makes me happy listening to it. And there are some lovely songs on there too. The Cicadas in the Trees is just beautiful.
Cicadas in the Trees for me was a pretty direct reference to Libba Cotton, Elizabeth Cotton, who was a guitar player. She played her guitar upside down and backwards. And I learned how to play guitar from Flip Breskin, who's a musician in Bellingham. Flip had the opportunity to learn directly from Elizabeth Cotton. So my introduction to playing guitar was like learning how to play all these Libba Cotton songs, learning by ear. And so that was a really important foundational thing. So it felt important to like sort of pay homage to her somewhere in this album. And so Cicadas in the Trees is basically sort of a song where the guitar part is very much like very much for me a tribute to Libba Cotton. It's just a song about getting along, about kind of taking a look at your community and like trying to treat your neighbors with like love and respect, and recognize that this world is moving forward and we need to move with it, and we need to create a world that is more just and more compassionate.
It's coming out on the 14th of May, is that correct?
That's
yeah. And that'll be up on your website.
Yes, and I also I have a newsletter that's a pretty reliable place. So if folks subscribe to my newsletter, then they'll be getting all the info that they need to hear.
I wanted to know what stories you would like to be a part of making sure are included in the Americana lineage. And then are there any stories that you feel like you don't know yet how to tell?
A step that I feel like I've been trying to like engage with this new album is exploring queerness in Americana. And I think that that's something that, has been done, but then in various forms in the past, but it's something that I would like to see explored more and in nuanced ways. And I think that that's a realm where like I definitely would like to focus more and figure out like interesting ways of kind of including that in a way that's like accessible across the board, but also kind of opens more space for queerness within old time and country. There's a lot of people doing a lot of great work in that. And I just want to see I want to keep it snowballing. I want old time and country and bluegrass and, that kind of whole umbrella of Americana, I want it to be a safer space for queerness. It's something that I've been thinking about lately as far as like exploring, stories that I am figuring out how to tell are, I guess, like in thinking about the anti-racism work that needs to happen within these genres, which I think is definitely starting to take root. And I think there's a lot of people doing a lot of really great work. Like Rhiannon Giddens comes to mind as someone who's very outspoken and doing a lot of awesome things, and many, many more people. But I think that there's so much that needs to be done around the topic of anti-racism, and I know that a lot of stories about race are not mine to tell as a white person, and so figuring out how to explore allyship is something that I want to keep working on, of like, okay, like how do I address this work with white folks, kind of lay the groundwork for working with white folks to be more accountable and to work on, the ways that racism comes up in their lives and the ways that they're perpetuating it, maybe without realizing that that's what they're doing, or like, things like that. And so figuring out how to tap into those stories of allyship that are going to be, accessible and not alienating for white folks, especially like rural white folks, which is like my background, where I grew up. What stories are actually going to resonate with the people that grew up in my hometown, but still move the conversation forward? That's something that I'm trying to figure out for myself.
In terms of being a musical storyteller, for what are you most grateful?
I mean, the thing that's popping into my brain is just the people that came before me. I mean, I feel like that it's been an ongoing theme in everything that I've been talking about. So maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but I feel like, yeah, I think that so much has been done within music and within story, and so many people have been contributing their thoughts and experiences, and so much of what I do is just built around the foundations that were built by all of these people all throughout time before me. So I think my gratitude is for uh, the musicians whose music I've been able to draw inspiration from, the mentors that I've had, and all of that.
I've asked each of the storytellers to come prepared to read one of their pieces of writing, but as McKain is a singer and songwriter, she's going to play for us one of her pieces now.
I was thinking I would play the opening song from the new album. It's called Making Peace with John Hartford, since we talked a little bit about John Hartford. It's a song, I think, kind of apt to our conversation in terms of it's about kind of connecting with creativity, and how a relationship with creativity can be kind of rocky, but also really beautiful. And so it's sort of a love song to creativity. And yeah, it's one of the peppier songs I've got. So figured that was worth something in these dark times. So here we go. Sometimes I cry at strangers standing in the supermarket, or when a water glass falls slowly and then shatters on the floor. I love you like I love my own imagination, like a kiss between the shoulder blades, like a future left more precious than it was the day before. I think that hope might be the only thing I still believe in. Sometimes it's all that you can count on when the going's getting hard. I'm glad they found someone and that Jesus will love them forever. Me, I hope my DNA won't make me fall apart. dancing with a lovely stranger. Life, I'll be here living. Your battle I will fight.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That is such a fun song.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
We'd like to turn it over now to the audience. How do you see musical storytellers challenging and rewriting the conventional narrative? And what would you like to see happen in the future? If you like this video, then give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos in this series, then click subscribe. If you hit the bell icon, you'll be notified when I upload again. For what are you most grateful today?